Disclaimer. This book may contain content that is considered historically inaccurate or culturally insensitive by modern standards. My hope is that by exploring old literature, we will better understand why people of the past thought the way that they did and understand the influences that shape their culture. This video is not intended for young audiences. Hi, I'm Morgan, and I am excited to read to you today from Out of Door Book, which is the 7th book in a series or a collection of books called The Children's Hour, which was published by Houghton Mifflin Co. in 1907. The Comical Crow Baby by Olive Thorne Miller. Nothing in the world of feathers is so comical as a crow baby, with its awkward bows and ungainly hops, its tottering steps on the fence, and its mincing, tight boot sort of gait on the ground, its eager fluttering when it has hopes of food, and its loud and unintermitting demand for the same. My window overlooked a long stretch of cattle pastures, and meadows still uncut, bounded on one side by woods, and in the middle of this valley unvisited by man, the crows of the neighborhood established a training school for their youngsters. A good glass let me in as unsuspected audience, and I had views of many interesting family scenes, supposed by the wary parents to be visible only to the cows stolidly feeding on the hillside. In this way I had all the fun and none of the trouble of the training business. It is astonishing how completely the manner of the adult crow is lacking in his young offspring, whose only external difference is the want of a tail. Must we, then, conclude that the dignity of a bird depends upon the length of his tail? We are accustomed to regard the crow as a grave and solemn personage with a serious role in life, and, indeed, life is such a constant warfare to him that I cannot see how he finds any enjoyment in it. Lowell says of him at one period, "The crow is very comical as a lover, and to hear him try to soften his croak to the proper St. Preux standard has something to the effect of a Mississippi boatman quoting Tennyson." If he is droll as a lover, he is much more entertaining as an infant. The first I knew of the new use of the pasture, I heard one morning a strange cry. It was loud and persistent, and sounded marvelously like "ma, ma." Mingled with it I heard the vigorous cries of crows. I looked over into the pasture, and there I first saw the crow baby, nearly as big and black as his mamma, but with no tail to speak of. He sat, not stood, on the rail fence, bawling at the top of his hoarse baby voice, "Ma, ma, ma!" And as he grew impatient, he uttered it faster and faster, and louder, drawing in his breath between the cries, and making it more like "ma, ma." Whenever Mamma flew over, he followed her movement with his eyes, turning his head and showing an eager, almost painful interest, till someone took pity on him and fed him. As he saw food approaching, his voice ran up several tones higher, in laughable imitation of a human baby cry. This note is of course the promise of a caw, but the ah is flattened to the sound of a and bar, which makes it a ludicrous caricature of our own first utterances. But sometimes Mamma did not heed the cries, and sailed calmly by, alighting a few rails beyond her hungry infant, though he held out his fluttering wings in the bird baby's begging way, exactly as does a young warbler who wouldn't be a mouthful for him. Then the little fellow would start up on unsteady legs to walk the rail to reach her, balancing himself with outspread wings, and when he got beside her, put his beak to hers in a coaxing way that I don't see how any mother could resist. But this wise dame had evidently hardened her heart. She probably wanted him to learn to help himself, for she dropped to the ground and went wading about in the wet grass and mud, and at length flew off without giving him a morsel. Then the disappointed youngster cuddled up to a brother crow baby, and both lifted up their voices and lamented the emptiness of the cold, cold world. Perhaps the most comical performance of this clumsy baby was his way of alighting on a fence when he had been flying. He seized the boat with his claws, which clung for dear life, while his body went on as it was going, with the result almost of a somersault. He tried to learn, however, He made great efforts to master the vagaries of fences, the irregularities of the ground, the peculiarities of the branches. He persistently walked the rail fence, though he had to spread both wings to keep his balance. Then he climbed to the top of the rail, which stood up at the corners, and maintained his position with great effort, but never gave up the attempt. These interesting young folks dote on fences, after they get used to them, and not having learned to recognize them as devices of the enemy, capable of concealing a trap of some sort, they will come quite near a house when they see no one about. So I, behind my blind, had excellent chance to watch their ways, for I try to keep my window view good by contenting myself with what I can see from it, and never going out to give the birds a notion that they must look out for visitors. One day, when the grass had been cut from the meadow before the house, and I had encamped under the shade of a big maple to see how the kingbirds were coming on and nesting, I noticed a young crow walking in the hot stubble, trying to find something to eat. He wandered about, looking in vain to see something attractive. A robin who was also engaged in a food hunt came and took his measure, looking sharply at him as if to decide whether it was his duty to go for him. He plainly recognized the youthfulness of the intruder, for after a moment's study he passed on, attending to his own business, while the young crow stared at him in open-mouthed curiosity. At last, the crow baby picked up an object, I could not tell what, which hung from his beak while he balanced the probabilities of its being good, aiding his deliberations by a gentle lift of the wings, which looked like a shrug of the shoulders. He decided to risk it, and swallowed, but instantly choked it up, and for some time shook his head as if to get rid of even the memory of it, when, a few minutes after this disastrous experience, he heard another baby utter the cries that indicate being fed. It seemed to suggest to him an easier way of getting satisfaction out of life. He spread his wings, flew to a tree, and began to call. To be a crow mamma is no sinecure. My heart went out to the poor souls, who must be torn between anxiety for their dear cantankerous offspring and fear of their deadly enemy, man. I watched with deep interest their method of training. One day I saw a baby get an object lesson in his proper attitude toward mankind in this way. An old and a young crow were nearer the house than usual, and I walked down toward the fence to see why. The instant my head appeared, the elder flew with terrific outcry, for which of course I did not blame the poor creature, since mankind has proved itself her bitterest foe. The infant was nearly frightened to death, and followed as quickly as his awkward wings would carry him. I do not like to figure as Rawhead and Bloody Bones in the nursery of even a crow baby, so I tried several times to redeem the bad name of my race, but to no avail. That subtle mamma had acquired her wisdom by experience, and she knew me as one of a species quite capable of murdering an innocent crow baby. I was interested to see the young family in the pasture taking lessons in following or flying in a flock. There was great excitement and calling, and all flew, excepting one who stood quietly on a big stone by himself. They simply circled around and alighted again, so it plainly was only an exercise. But the baby, who did not learn the lesson and follow, was punished by one of the grown-ups, who flew directly against him on the return and knocked him off his perch. The hint was taken, and the next time they flew, no one stayed behind. Day by day, the excitement in the crow world grew, and new families appeared in the pasture as fast as old ones got out. The rails of the fence were always occupied by young ones, though never more than 5 or 6 at a time, crying and shrieking and calling for "Ma!" and old ones all the time flying about half distracted, cawing and trying, I suppose, to enforce some order and discipline among the unruly rows. Order, however, was quite a secondary consideration. The pressing duty of the hour was feeding. A crow parent on a foraging expedition is a most unwelcome visitor to the farmer with young chickens, or the bird lover interested in the fate of nestlings. Yet when I saw the persecuted creature in the character of provider for 4 hungry and ever clamorous mouths, to whose wants she is as alive as we are to the wants of our babies, I took a new view of crow depredations, and could not see why her children should not have a chicken or a bird for breakfast as well as ours. Poor pointed crow, against whom every man's hand is raised. She feels, with reason, that every human being is a deadly enemy thirsting for her life, that every cylinder pointed upward is loaded with death, that every string is a cruel snare to entangle and maim her. Yet her offspring, dear as ours to us, clamor for food. How should she know that it is wrong to eat chickens, or that robin babies were made to live and grow up, and crow babies to die of starvation? The farmer ignores the millions of insects she destroys, and shoots her for the one chicken she takes, though she has been amply proved to be one of the most valuable servants. The kingbird and the oriole worry her life out of her because her babies like eggs, as who does not? In fact, there are, emphatically, two sides to the crow question, and I take the side of the crow. And that is the end of the Comical Crow Baby by Olive Thorne Miller. I hope that you enjoyed this story and that you are having a great day. Bye!